like the eternal city that is Rome. Rising upwards like a heavenly choir.
Hello, everyone. Happy Labor Day. I hope you like the new intro. It's a lot shorter, so I have to really get prepared beforehand. Evan Frazier, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Michael.
So you're really the perfect guest for Labor Day, and we really met maybe 2 weeks ago. First started talking maybe a month ago, and it all kind of providentially worked out. So this will be a great show. But to briefly introduce Evan, Evan has worked in financial planning for over a decade. He has worked for companies like Edward Jones, Charles Schwab, Personal Capital, and Empower. He has his accredited asset management specialist certification, as well as a wife and 4 kids. In his free time, he loves to volunteer with the Knights of Columbus and his Inferno Men's Group. He is also the founder and president, is that the term, or
Yep,
CEO of
we'll see.
TekWise Financial Planners. So, Evan, welcome on once again, but
Yeah,
we'll jump right into it if you're ready. So, what
absolutely.
is labor? Pretty
Yeah,
basic question there.
so we are coming in today on Labor Day. So I thought talking about labor and kind of Catholic social teaching around that would be great. So I think when we think labor in the American world, I think we think of stuff that gets paid, right? Jobs that pay you. Okay. But I think that's kind of a limiting definition, really, because I think there's still a lot of labor that we do that isn't necessarily paid, right? Um, Stay-at-home moms that cook, clean, and homeschool. It's a lot of labor. It doesn't necessarily come with a paycheck. And so I think it's important for us to always look back and see, where do we labor, and just understand that not all labor is paid labor. When we celebrate Labor Day.
Yeah. So, why do we labor? Why do we work at all?
Yeah,
That really goes back to Genesis, doesn't it? But
it does, and that's what I was going to say. It goes back to Genesis 2:15, where Adam and Eve are really told that you know we have to work, that there is goodness in that work. And I think sometimes we strive to maybe get out of work sometimes and to work less. But I think we have to remember that we've really been mandated by God to do work. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, again, as we have Labor Day today.
yeah, so do you think it's important to really strike the balance between work and rest? It's like for both of us, we are kind of our own business owners. Me in the unofficial sense, just having the YouTube channel and the website and all of that. But you actually started your own company. So for both of us, you say before the show, you told me you didn't, or you did work today. And so I also work today just because I work at the monastery. They don't celebrate secular holidays, but what is like the balance to strike between like constantly working all the time and rest?
hmm
Like, what is the importance of rest?
hmm Well, I think when we talk about rest and we talk more of like the Sabbath and getting rest for that, is while it is good to work and we're mandated to work, we also need to take time to remind ourselves, really, um, that God exists and that we need to have that relationship with Him. And while there is time to have that relationship with Him, work, I went to Benedictine, it's the degree up there is ora et labora, work and prayer, right? And so we should be praying while we
Yeah.
work, but we also need to take time. And rest isn't just sleeping or sitting on the couch, but rest can be taking time to study your Bible, praying, spending time with the family, things like that. And I think it's that balance of we do need to take those times to do it, but it can be difficult, as you well know, as a entrepreneur to set those times aside. And so I think there are times where we just have to say, look, this is the time that I spend with my family, and we just have to be diligent about that.
Yeah, it's important not to burn yourself out or work too hard. You have to stay balanced. So, yeah, really, how are work and human dignity connected? And what has the church said about that?
Yeah. So So we know that God has mandated work. How does that tie into the human dignity? People need to be able to labor. I think there's really something in our souls. We strive or want to labor, right? We feel good after a job is well done, right? It's nice to, at the end of the day, this is one of the things I miss about working with my hands sometimes, is being able to have a finished product. There is pride in that, right? I don't think anybody
Mhm.
would really disagree and say that they don't feel pride or feel good when they finished a project that they're happy about. I know I have friends who work in the construction industry, and when we're driving around town, they'll point stuff out and they're like, I worked on that. I did that. Right. And
Mhm.
they take a lot of pride in that. And so part of where that human dignity comes is being able to take pride in work well done. But it also means that we need to, I think this is why welfare is so bad. We need to let people work. The idea of just paying people to not work, I think, takes away some of their value as a human, um, because they're not being able to fulfill that need that they have to work.
Yeah, and that really reminds me of my grandpa. He used to work on the railroads, and so even now, like 20 years after the fact, 30 years after the fact, every time we drive past the railroads, he's like, I was working on that one, I was working on that one. So there is something lasting and fulfilling about work. And I believe that's like how our ancestors really built the great cathedrals. They were so invested in their work that they would spend their life building something they would probably never see completed. So yeah, working for the future, and that's I'm trying to transition into the next topic, investing. So
Well, I wanted to say something about that real quick,
go
because I
ahead.
think you kind of hit on this. Is that I think retiring is kind of a newer concept for us and for humanity, right? You know, for a longest time, people didn't really retire. You kept working. Now, maybe you weren't able to do the same work that you could, hauling heavy stuff, or, you know, if you're a stone carver, maybe your eyes weren't good enough to do the fine stone carvings, things like that. But people never really stopped working. And I think what you're starting to see now, and we talk about this a lot in the financial planning world, people hit 65, they retire, and 2 years later, they're dead, right?
Hmm.
And it's become a real epidemic. And we talk about, well, why does that happen? And I think it's because people, especially men, tend to get lost when they no longer have that structure of work. They feel like they've lost their value, and they kind of become listless. The people I see who are successful when they retire and do well is they change their outlook and they find some other way to labor. So maybe it's not going into that software developer job. Maybe it's volunteering at their church. Maybe it's volunteering, or in some other hobby or some way.
Yeah.
But I think this idea that we just hit 65 and we stop working, is not good for our souls.
Yeah, and is that more so an American thing rather than a European phenomenon?
That's a good question. I have only really seen the studies from the American side, because I typically deal with just American retirement planning. But I might have to take a look at that now that you brought that up and see if it's a cultural thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because it just seems like in America, people almost don't really like their jobs or they work too much. And that kind of goes back to the Protestant work ethic. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think again, with the Protestant work ethic, I think we've lost the ability to, um, take rest. Right, that we've been ground into our American psyche for so long that you have to work, you have to put in 60, 70 hours a week, you know, and if you're not, then you're being lazy. And I think part of that is too is because we've lost the ability to do hobbies, right? I think
Hmm.
for a lot of times, whether it's just sitting down and doing TV or something like that, we don't, it used to be that you would put in your 40 hours, that was enough to make a living, and then you did your hobbies. You wrote books, you played instruments, you made art, And while we still have some of those things, I don't think the majority of people are doing that with their free time. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think it's for some people, because they don't know what to do with that free time, that's when they work the 60, 70 hours a week. And the Protestant work ethic says, great. And then for the others, they watch TV or zone out because, again, they don't know where to find that beauty in their hobbies that they need to chase.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the book Joseph Piper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture? I
I have
believe he
not.
was a Catholic. It's a book that's really became popular again in recent years. I've heard that recommended a few times, but that's pretty much what it talks about. Just that America really lost what true leisure is. I personally haven't read the book, so I can't talk too much about it without just kind of regurgitating things I've heard about it. Um, yeah, like leisure time in America is seen as like plopping down on the couch and watching television, and that's not true leisure at all. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, like doing what you enjoy. What advice would you give to someone? How do they discover that? Like in a
Hmm.
vocational sense, like how do they learn their talents in a way that they could be useful working?
They have to fail. I think we are so afraid of failing that we are unwilling to try new things. Okay. So as we get older, I think that sometimes we don't want to go out and take those dance lessons, right? Because I don't want to fail and look silly. We don't try and pick up that guitar. Just don't want to look silly trying to learn at those things, right? And so before you can become really good at something, you have to be bad at it. And so I think we have to be willing to try things out, where we might fail and we might fail in front of others. But within that, we can start to find our passions. And maybe we find out, boy, I hate playing guitar. Right. Like, and so
Yeah.
I've done that for a little while and then I decided to do something different. And that's fine. It's not a terrible failure if I find out after a month or two that I hate playing guitar. So I think we just have to be willing to try new things and fail at those things until we figure out whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and just to use a personal example, I went to college for a year and a half to get a electrical engineering degree. Once I graduated from community college, I found out after working for a month I did not like that career path. So that's kind of how I ended up at the monastery. But that's a story for another time. Um, yeah. However, going like back to investing.
Hmm.
So when is investing exploitive and speculative? Like when is it almost not
So
in line with Christian values?
yeah, so we hear a lot about this kind of in new Christian thought where people have complained about, oh, investing it's speculative and the Bible says we're not supposed to speculate or gamble, right? And so I think with that, what we have to understand is how investing helps others increase their labor. Okay. So the problem we have in the United States is that when we get money, when we work, there's no way to store that value, that labor, because inflation eats at our money, right?
Hmm.
And so long ago, back in the day, I mean, you didn't see massive amounts of inflation until governments figured out how to clip coins or how to do other things to eat at that. So the problem that the Christian has as a good steward of their money is, all right, once I've created that value and I've been paid for that, how do I maintain that? And in our culture today, the way to do that is through investing. Okay.
Hmm.
Part of being that good steward, because a lot of people are saying, well, I don't want to invest, so they just, in a sense, stick it in the ground. They might stick it at the bank, and the bank pays them a measly sum, and inflation eats away at that. So it's kind of like the servant who just buried it in the ground. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think with investing, what we're called to do is to use that money to help fund companies or to provide liquidity to other people who have helped build these companies up, right? So I understand that when you go and you buy stock in Apple or whoever, Apple's not getting that money. It's somebody else who made that first investment, right? So we're not just speculating and saying, all right, we think Apple's going to go up. I mean, that's part of it. We hope we're doing, but we're also providing that liquidity for people to sustain the investing world. Now, what's interesting about the way that works now and where it comes in with what I call like faith-based investing or biblically responsible investing.
Yeah, that's what your company specializes in.
Yes. Is that we actually now have an opportunity to shape the way that company works. Okay. So I'll give you an example. So one of the companies that I work with, they build Christian ETFs or biblically inspired ETFs. And what they will do is they'll have certain rules and they'll say, if companies do these things, got to go. We just can't use them, right?
Hmm.
So Amazon's a pretty evil company. You know, other companies make pornography, make abortion drugs, things like that. Cannot have those companies in the portfolio. But there are companies who are kind of on the fence. So there's a bank in the Midwest called M&T Bank. And what they were looking to do is they were starting to censor and debank certain Christians who were speaking out and saying these things are wrong.
Hmm.
Inspire, this is the company that makes those ETFs, held a big enough position as shareholders to go to them and say, look, we're a significant part of your shareholders here, and we're not comfortable with you doing that. Right now, if you and I just did that by ourselves, they're going to laugh us out of the boardroom. They're not even going to get in the boardroom, right?
Yeah.
But when Christians are able to pool their money together through that and have someone who's already has clearly defined Christian rules for what this money can and cannot do, all of a sudden now they got $500 million. They're going to get a seat at the table, and they can now use that to start instilling Christian values into these companies.
Yeah. So,
And M&T is one where they successfully did that. They actually got them to stop debanking those Christians.
yeah. And where did this like phenomenon of companies like deplatforming Christians really start? Like, how many years has this been going on? And when did you start your company, by the way?
Mm-hmm. So I started TekWise about a year ago. What had originally happened was Personal Capital. Really loved working for them. Bought out by a larger company, and they started changing things that I didn't agree with. And so I finally said, if I'm going to do the kind of work I want to do where I can look myself in the mirror each day, I'm going to have to start my own.
Hmm.
So that was what kind of was the impetus for that. Wanted to really have my Catholic, my Christian faith shine through on that. And that's when I came across some of these companies like Inspire ETFs or Timothy plans, companies that specifically are building investment portfolios for Christians that care about not profiting from abortion or things like that. And so
Hmm.
I'm able to work with those companies to build portfolios for my clients and do financial planning that then all aligns within that Christian framework. I mean, and I would say Christians, we've been deplatformed for millennia off and on,
Yeah.
Um, before we came on here, we were just watching a short movie about the saints Felicity and Perpetua with my little girls, talking about how
Hmm.
they got rounded up by the Roman government. And so I think it's been going off and on. I think more recently, I would say within the last 20 years or so, I think what you've seen is that there's been a secularization push, which is why we have Target and Bud Light and those issues popping up now. And I think that the Christians are starting to wake up and see what's happening and starting to push back. And I think that's why the deplatforming has really started, is because they want to be able to silence them. But it's harder to do that now with the internet and just more access to freedom and news, where in the past, the 1950s, 1970s, they might
Yeah.
have gotten kicked out and nobody would have heard about it.
Yeah. So it all balances out, I think. The problems with the internet, the problems with the modern world, and um, yeah, as you said, it's not new. So Christians really are prepared for this. Uh, yeah, before we go to that next question, that might have been a good transition. One last question about investing. Is it moral for Christians to invest in cryptocurrency,
Hmm.
say Bitcoin or any of them? I don't even know what they have now.
Yeah, I think that, there's a ton of different ones from that. I don't see, it's just another form of money in my eyes. Okay. And so, I don't know if you necessarily say you would invest in crypto, or it's just I'm using crypto as part of the portfolio. I don't think biblically there's anything, uh, I would say biblically neutral is how that, or morally neutral would be to that. Now, if you had crypto that was specifically trying to harm someone, there's a lot of different like utility coins and things like that that can be used for good or evil. Um, I would I would have to say to see what they're doing, but I think on the whole, it's a morally neutral issue.
Yeah. So another dichotomy is the like liberalism side of things, the individualism side of things versus Christ. Like, how do we balance really our personal rights with the commandments of the Bible?
Yeah, and I think that one really kind of goes back to the labor that we were talking about, because you know, as we talked earlier about labor, being a mandate from God. But one of the other things about labor is that it's meant to help our greater community. Now, you brought up the liberalism. When we talk about liberalism, that's not really the conservatives versus liberals that we think about. When we talk about traditional liberalism, it's just a call of, all right, it's the individual. I have individual rights. Forget the larger society. Everything can be boiled down to somewhat more of a libertarian point of view, is what that's really looking at. And that's really kind of the American individualism philosophy that many of us have grown up with, and I'm still working to try and shed that idea of it's just about me. And I think within the labor, one of the things of why we should labor is that we can use that labor to help others. Christ calls us um, to help. I mean, if you look like in Ephesians 4, chapter 4:28, it states, "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor and do honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need." Right. And so,
Mhm.
again, tying in our labor, but also with investing, is that it frees us up to help our neighbors. Okay. And that's where I think this idea of, well, it's my money, my individual rights, I shouldn't have to give that up for the greater good, right? Or
Yeah.
I'm investing to make a lot of money. I shouldn't worry about whether the companies I'm invested in are contributing to the greater good of the world, right? Now, where I think some people start to get shy of this and they say, well, that sounds an awful lot like communism, right?
Mhm.
Gosh, what's the greater world? I think there's a difference between you as an individual having a relationship with God and saying, I am called to use my labor to help others voluntarily, versus having a state or a government that forces you to do that involuntarily, like you would have under communism. And I think that's the bigger difference, is that sometimes Christianity kind of looks like communism, but in reality, it's a voluntary call that we are given to help our neighbors. And so when we take people's ability to labor away from them, and again, tying back into that human dignity, they don't have the ability to help their neighbor, and they don't have the ability to help with that human dignity to pull their neighbor out of that poverty. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think those kind of all tie up within that. And so we have to ask ourselves, all right, yes, I'm an individual, but I am called to the greater good through Christ.
Yeah, so that kind of brings up the other topic of distributism. Do you have any thoughts on that? People
hmm
will accuse that of being Christian socialism, or
Yeah, I think distributism is our only hope and way out of the current mess that we have. Okay.
yeah,
And again, I think it comes down to that voluntarism of, yeah, you know what? I could try and squeeze every last dollar out of my labor force to make as much money as possible, right? But I can only do that for so long before they will rise up and revolt against us, from a management standpoint.
mhm,
And I think what distributing says is, look, as an individual, called by God, you shouldn't be squeezing every last dollar out of them, because again, it takes away from their human dignity. It takes away from their ability to help their community, to help their neighbor, um, and to build a life worth living. And so, you know, do you really want to have to answer on Judgment Day to why you needed that extra dollar? Right? Doesn't mean you have to go and be poor, but you have to take into consideration your duty as a entrepreneur to take care of your workforce.
yeah. Uh, so another question: how does the principle of subsidiarity affect labor?
Yeah. So I think part of the problem of where we've gotten to now is that we have moved labor so far away from the final production or final use of it that it makes it really hard to make good decisions because you don't see the ramification of that, right? We've pushed a lot of our manufacturing off into India and China. So we don't have to deal with the smog and the pollution that it creates, or that we don't have to live next to the sweatshops that they are doing that. So the
Yeah,
principle of subsidiarity is really saying it's a Catholic teaching of why, or we need to, all the decisions should be made at that local level, right? And so when you start doing that, it's hard to make the decision of, well, I want really cheap sneakers if I have to live next door to the child labor factory, right? And so I think if we
mhm,
start to bring, that production back, and we have to live closer to it and be neighbors with those people that we oppress, I think it's a lot harder for us to turn a blind eye to that.
yeah. So going back to like your personal story, that's kind of how you came to start your own business,
Mhm.
TekWise Financial Planners. So how big is this company? Like, how many employees do you currently have?
Mhm. So right now it is just me. We're still in that startup and growth phase.
Yeah.
For that, it's hard to get that information out there. Just a lot of people don't know that faith-based investing is an option. One of the really cool tools that I have when working with people is we can actually screen and see what's happening with your current investments. So I had a client recently. We looked through, we want to look at his IRAs and his 401ks and things like that. He volunteers on the weekends at a pro-life shelter, and he was horrified to find out that he owned companies that were making abortion drugs. So Johnson and Johnson, the healthcare company,
Yeah.
makes abortion drugs. Um, he owned Netflix inside of one of the funds, right? A lot of people don't know this. Netflix distributes pornography, right? Same for Apple.
Mhm.
And so being able to x-ray what they're doing and see that, I think goes a long way. And they go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I was supporting this. It's actually helped me find one of my favorite new Bible verses in Deuteronomy. It says, do not bring money from prostitutes or the wages from dogs into the house of the Lord. I always chuckle because I found out wages of dogs means male prostitutes. But I think it's an important thing for us to understand is that we will be held accountable to say, now that we know, or you know, that you're making money supporting off these immoral things, you cannot do that anymore. Okay. So I think that's a big part of my job is just educating people and saying, hey, do you know that this is happening with your money and that you'll be called to testify about it when you die?
Yeah, and that is very important just to really speak out against these immoral companies. And even people have asked me, like, is supporting this company or buying something off this website, is that allowed? Is this website doing anything bad that you know of? And like just on a personal level, I don't know that, but like actually having a company that is able to analyze that, that is very imperative just for all Christians. So I do commend you there. But yeah, like just asking for anyone, say they have like $1,000 or less, how do they get into investing? Should they go to your company or really just go? People have Robinhood nowadays. That's the online stock app, and that's what I used back in high school. But dumping money into an S&P 500, really supporting 500 different companies, you're really bound to run into immoral companies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when I talk with clients about financial planning, and it's not just about investing. And what I always say is that if it's got a dollar sign and affects your life, we want to talk about it. Okay. So usually where I start with people first is debt, right? Because that's the big thing that really stops people from being free is when you have large amounts of debt. So we always kind of divide it up into two types of debt. There's good debt and there's bad debt. So bad debt's like your credit cards, student loans, things like that that aren't backed by an asset, right? Good debt would be like something like a mortgage, right? It allows you to buy an asset that's appreciating while you're paying it off, all right? So that's how we kind of differentiate good debt, bad debt. Is it backed by an asset or is it backed by a liability? And so before you really start investing, you should really look at, paying off that bad debt. And that's something where I work with clients to help develop a budget, figure out how long, what's the best place to start, and things like that. And then from there, then we can start talking about investing. So typically, when we'll sit down and talk about using these companies that build Christian or faith-based ETFs and other types of well-diversified portfolios within that. But really, I'd say the first step is getting out of debt.
So yeah, I think this has been a pretty good show. Very good show for the day. Again, it's Labor Day. If anyone's watching this after the fact, you can always celebrate Labor Day, even if it's not Labor Day. So this is really a timeless show, anyhow. But yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming on again, and just for anyone watching. Your TekWise Financial Planners, Evan's company, is in the description, so do check that out. So yeah, everyone have a happy Labor Day. It's almost over now, but there's still some time to rest before we go back to work. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, if anybody is interested in having a good understanding of what their portfolio, their current 401k, IRA, things like that, one of the free services we offer is that we will run that screen and give you a report and say, here's what you have, and then here are the good things that the companies are doing, and then here are the problematic things that they're doing. So if you are interested in that, our website is TekWiseFinancial.com. And you can send me a message there. You can also find me on LinkedIn and be happy to set up a meeting where we go through and run that report. It takes about 5 minutes to go through that. But just want to educate you and let you know what you have.
Yeah, it sounds great. Thanks for mentioning that. I would have never known about that, and I'm interested in it now. I'll recommend that to a few other people I know. So, yeah, thanks again, Evan. And thanks everyone for watching. May God bless you all. Until next time.
Not of the modern world.
For
The modern
yes.
world. That's
Yeah,
right.
and
Bishop Barron. Hello, it's from the airport. Hello, we're doing good. Nice to meet you. So who are you, sir?
I'm Archbishop Joseph Nauman of the Archdiocese of Kansas City in Kansas.
Yeah, do you want to bless this recorder? Is there a blessing for that?
There's a blessing for everything. So,
Yeah, say.
Lord, we ask you to bless this instrument and use it for good and for evangelization.